So this video is going to teach you about how to interpret and understand house sequences and house pairs. And if you understand how that works, then you have a lot of what you need to know to be able to understand lordship placements too. This video is the first in a series that I'll be doing on house sequences and pairs, because I recently started offering a new report called The Houses of Life. And the most important information in that report is the sequence of houses that I describe as the DNA code of the houses. I give you a sequence of the 12 houses ordered according to positivity and prominence. That is the most important thing in the report, but it's a very new way of presenting information to people, and people don't really have the toolkit to unpack all the valuable information that's in it. So I wanted to provide these videos to help you do that, to give you the toolkit to use that. So let's get started. Today I will show you specifically for houses 1 and 2. If you know the 1-2 house sequence, then you pretty much understand what the first lord does in the second house, or what the second lord does in the first house. So that's additionally helpful. If you have 1 followed by 2 in your DNA sequence of houses, then you have a 1-2 house sequence, or it could be 2 followed by 1. It would be basically the same thing. And then pair, or poles we could call them, if you have house 1 at one end of the list, say all the way in the beginning, and house 2 all the way at the end, then you have a pole or a pair. The way poles work and the way sequences work is essentially the same, except that the positivity or negativity of the interpretations gets flipped. And really, the way to interpret this, as is the way to interpret anything in an astrology chart, is to use the concept of resonance that I've been going through with you in the planets and sign videos that I've been doing. So you want to look for a harmonious resonance between the two objects involved, or a disharmonious resonance. So we want to try to find areas in which something the first house represents resonates with something that the second house represents, and then we evaluate if it's a positive resonance or disharmonious resonance. So for example, the first house represents health, and the second house represents exactly the same thing, health. And you can see why if you look at the trees on the right hand side of the screen. You'll see why. So since the first house represents health and the second house represents health, if you get a sequence in your DNA code of 1-2 or 2-1, or if you get the second lord in the first or the first lord in the second, then you're going to get a synergy on the topic of health. And the very simple way to interpret this is person is healthy and or health oriented. So depending on the rest of the chart, this could make them a doctor, this could make them a nutritionist, this could make them a cook. Now, let's say instead of having this as a sequence of 2-1 or 1-2, if you have it as a pole. So let's say if you have house 2 as the first house on your list and house 1 is the last. So in that case, you flip the positivity. So when this poles, then harmonious resonance between the house is negative and disharmonious is positive. I don't know if that makes sense, especially the first time you're hearing it, but sit with it. Realize this is a very new paradigm for interpretation and very even new information about the chart. So sit with it a bit and it will make sense over time. So if you have a pole of 1 and 2, then it's probably unhealthy or not very aware of health, not very good with medicine, not very good with food, because you have 1 or 2 as being very positive, but 2 or 1 as being very negative. Okay? So the more examples I show you, the more this stuff will make sense. So let's just move right along. The second important synergy between the first house and the second house is that the first house represents tangibility, tangible things, and the second house represents solid, real, stable things like wealth and money. So here you have a harmony. First house is touchable, real things, and the second house is touchable, real things, wealth, money, etc. And the interpretation that you get is it's good for wealth. A person can be wealthy. Or they could be wealth-oriented and understand money, which means they're probably going to become wealthy. And not just specifically with money, but when you have this sequence of 1-2, the people tend to be good with practical things, real things, touchable things. They tend to be down-to-earth or realistic. Again, this is the interpretation for if it's a sequence, or if you have first lord in the second house or second lord in the first house. But it would be opposite if you have it as a pole. If you have one house on one side of your DNA code and the other house on the other side of the DNA code, then there's a clash in here. And one house is positive about tangible things and the other house is negative about tangible things. So that makes a difficult outcome. So it would indicate having trouble with money. Hope that makes sense. It will start to sink in, I promise. Moving on, more examples to help you see it. Another issue with the first house and the second house is that the first house represents the self. The second house represents the family. And so these two are sort of opposite types of things. They don't really harmonize in the symbolism. So you expect something difficult out of this clash. And the difficulty is regarding to relationships, partnerships, family. And the specifics about this is the person with this kind of sequence, 1, 2, would tend to get lazy or princessy or want to have other people support them. Like just expect other people to be supporting and be overly reliant on support. It can be vice versa, right? It can be where you get overly dedicated to supporting others. This is how it works for a 1-2 sequence. But now to explain how it works for a 1-2 pair, where they're on opposite sides of the code, you'll flip this around to be something good. Say the first house is in the beginning of the code. Then you have a positive house about self, and the second house is at the end of the code. Then that's a negative indication about family. So the interpretation is this person comes out of no support. They rise up on their own strength. Or if it's flipped, the second house is in the positive side and the first house is in the negative side, is even though this person doesn't really have personal strength, they have a great support system that helps them through it. So hopefully the more examples that we're going through, the more the basic theory is becoming clear. Let's go ahead and look at another specific example. The first house signifies your skills, and the second house signifies your knowledge. Knowledge and skill is very, very similar. So let's count this as a synergy. And the result that you expect is knowledgeable, skillful person. You'll get this with second lord in the first house, first lord in the second house, or if you have a 1-2 house sequence. If, however, you have a 1-2 house pair, then it's not so easy for you to learn. You might be klutzy, not so skilled, not so skillful, not so dexterous. And one final example that will finish covering all the important points about the first and the second house and how they combine. The first house has to do with your appearance. The second house has to do with your face. Here it's mentioned as mouth. Mouth and the whole face is really included in the second house. So that's quite similar. The face is the most important part of the appearance. That's what most people look at most of the time. So you have a synergy between appearance and face, and you get the idea that the person with the first lord in the second house, second lord in the first house, 1-2 house sequence, they should be good looking. Or if they're on opposite ends, they're the ugly ducklings. So hopefully this is starting to shed light for you on what this DNA code of houses is all about in the Houses of Life report. Also helping shed light just in general on how to understand lordship positions, like the lord of this house going into that house. This is just the first one. The next one that I'll do will be 1-3. Then I'll do a video on 1 and 4, 1 and 5, 1 and 6, and eventually we'll do all 144. And that is not even scratching the surface of all the possible combinations. But by that time, you'll really be good at understanding how to read these DNA codes. So thank you very much. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell and tell my mom that you like me. Thank you.